Hi grade 7s, as you can see I've got my Whitney's Kiss here and we're going to be looking at chapter 2. She felt her cell phone vibrating before she heard it ring. Her daughter had somehow changed the ringtone. She listened to the irritating tune for a few seconds before answering. Hello? Good evening, is this Mrs. Sotelo? Yes, who's this? My name is Roshni Pillay. I'm Whitney's English teacher at Tembeletu Primary. Oh yes, good evening, Mrs. Pillay. Whitney often speaks about you. Is something wrong? Well, no, it is nothing too serious. There's just something I want you to know about. Is this a good time to speak with you? Yes, of course. What is it? Whitney's mother was quite concerned. If a teacher called a parent, it could only mean trouble. She thought, well, Mrs. Sotelo, this afternoon at our athletics event. Whitney sat cross-legged on her bed and dreamily stared out the window. It was getting dark outside already, and the high orange floodlights that lit up most of the township at night were already on. Her school books were open in front of her, but her attention was not on her work. Her thoughts fluttered like a butterfly between flowers. She would start off trying to concentrate on her homework. Then her mind drifted to Lucky. Then from him to her problems at home. Then back to Lucky and the storeroom. And then to her parents again and the problems they were having. The trouble between her parents had started when her father had moved back home to Tembeletu because of his illness. For as long as Whitney could remember, her father had lived and worked in the city, and he only came home once or twice in a year. Whitney had always loved it when her father came home. He usually brought her something nice from the city. They had spent long hours talking, and he'd always shown a real interest in her life. During those times, her parents had always more or less tolerated each other. But now that he had moved back home, the tolerance had disappeared. They seemed to be unable to get through a day without a fight. Mother was not used to having a man at home, much less a sick man who needed to be cared for. This was not like having to care for Makulu when she became ill several years ago. Grandmother had passed away only a few weeks after falling ill. Father's sickness was much more drawn out, and he was a lot harder to live with than Makulu. His bad health had made him irritable and short-tempered. Even Whitney could not talk to him like they used to. He was always exhausted and spent a lot of time in bed or just lying on the old sofa in the living room. Whitney was 10 years old when Makulu died, and for 2 years after that, she'd lived alone with her mother. She missed her grandmother very much, and life at home was quite lonely without any brothers or sisters. The fact that Whitney was an only child struck her as quite unique and a little strange. Most of her friends had several brothers and sisters living with them at home. Whitney had asked her mother on more than one occasion why she had no brothers or sisters, but it was not a topic her mother wanted to talk about. There were certain topics her mother always seemed to avoid, and this made Whitney hesitant to discuss things openly with her mother. In fact, during the 2 years they had lived alone together, Whitney's relationship with her mother had seemed to grow more distant rather than closer. She had so many questions about life and about growing up and about things that she longed to ask someone, a woman. But she could just not talk with her mother like she could with Makulu. If only grandmother was still around. Whitney sighed and tried to focus on her homework, but to no avail. Her thoughts would simply not allow her to concentrate on her books. Her mind turned to Lucky again. She couldn't stop thinking about him. Even when her mind was on other things, he was there, quietly in the background. Being in love brought a constant awareness of him, and a constant awareness of him that would even stay with her at night while she slept. When she heard her mother's cell phone ring a few minutes ago, She was hoping that somehow it would be Lucky, even though he did not have a telephone. He'd never phoned her before. But maybe tonight he'd missed her and gone to a public telephone or to the photo container to phone her. Her thoughts were interrupted by her father's gruff voice. "Whitney!" The yell was so loud that a dog down the road started barking. Their house was not considered small, but it wasn't big either. Just 2 bedrooms, a small living room, and an even smaller kitchen. The toilet was outside around the back of the house. There was no need for her father to yell so thunderously from the kitchen. Whitney knew what it meant. She was in trouble. And when her father yelled like this, it was not a good time to keep him waiting. She got up and made her way through the living room to the kitchen. "Your mother just got a call from Mrs. Pillay. You know, your English teacher," her father began. Whitney cringed. It never occurred to her that her teacher might phone her parents about the incident with Lucky this afternoon. She felt unprepared for this. "I know who Mrs. Pillay is," she fired back. Maybe attack would be the best defense, she thought. If she got angry, maybe her father would ease up on her a bit. "This is no time to be cheeky with me, Ntombi," she said. She said she caught you in the storeroom with an older boy. Apparently you were..." Her father paused to catch his breath. "Apparently you were all over each other, and the boy is from Tembelettu High." That's not how she put it," her mother interrupted. "Will you stop interrupting me? I'm talking to this daughter of yours," her father snapped. "We didn't do anything," Whitney said, and stepped in between her parents. She didn't want them fighting each other over this. "Well, why don't you tell your mother and me exactly what is going on then? You always speak very highly of Mrs. Pillay. And if she thinks it's necessary to call us about this..." He had to stop again to catch his breath. Her father was always tired and got out of breath so easily, it clearly frustrated him and made him even grumpier. "She didn't see anything because nothing happened. She's probably just worried about me because I'm friends with a boy in high school." "We're also concerned about that," her mother filled in. "Is he your boyfriend? You are far too young to be walking around with a boyfriend already." "He's not my boyfriend, we're just friends," Whitney protested. "Well, sounds to me like you're more than just friends. And if he's pulling you into storerooms..." "It wasn't like that. He's a nice guy, and besides, I'm 13 already and almost in high school. I can make my own decisions." Whitney crossed her arms and looked the other way. Her father raised his voice again. "Clearly you are not old enough to make your own decisions. If you decide to sneak into a storeroom with a boy much older than you..." He was angry now, and this made him even more tired. He slumped into a chair. "I don't have this energy for your nonsense. You stay away from this guy and..." He broke into an ugly-sounding cough. Whitney looked at the floor. She didn't like to see her father like this. "You stay away from him, and I don't want any more phone calls from your teachers. Now get out of here and go do your homework before I take out the shambok. You should focus on your schoolwork rather than on boyfriends right now." More coughing. "Yeah, bo baba," Whitney muttered and stormed out of the kitchen. Inside, she felt relieved. She got off much more lightly than she'd expected. If her father had been healthier, she would probably have been given a beating. From the bedroom, she could hear her parents still arguing about it. "You're letting her get away with it just like that?" she heard her mother say. "She won't listen anyway. I told her to stay away from him. That's all we can do." "That is no punishment. She could be sleeping with him." "And what should I have told her? I don't have the energy for all this. You speak to her then. Go on, get out. I've had enough." His voice sounded raspy and tired. Through the doorway, she watched her mother enter the living room and sit down on the old sofa. She put her hand over her eyes. Whitney felt sorry for her. Her father was not the person they once knew, and with his bad health and grouchy moods, he sometimes made life unbearable for her mother. She was clearly taking a lot of strain. Whitney also felt crabbier. Her periods had started the year before, and she could get quite irritable all of a sudden, especially at home. Why did she get into arguments so quickly with her parents? Her temper could flare up like a volcano, sudden and unexpected. Sometimes she said things that surprised even herself, and she always regretted them later. She wasn't like this with her friends. Maybe the tension at home was getting to her. Or maybe her parents just didn't understand her. Her mind turned to school, and it brought a sudden pang of worry. The worst was still to come, Whitney thought. She would still have to face Mrs. Pillay in class the next day. That brings us to the end of chapter 2, and in our next video lesson we'll be looking at chapter 3.